The water was still. No wind, no swell, no commercial traffic moving through the narrowest choke point in the world's most contested maritime corridor. Just the sound of rotors cutting the humid dark at low altitude, blacked out, running cold, pushing through the night at a speed that left no margin for error and no room for second thoughts. 12 helicopters. Staggered intervals. Each one carrying men who had spent the last 6 weeks learning a single building the way a surgeon learns a body. Not from maps, but from a full-scale replica sitting in the middle of a desert training range where nobody could see it from the road. The mission had a name. The name doesn't matter. What matters is the target. A hardened command complex buried 3 levels underground on the northern shore of the strait, coordinating the encrypted fire control networks that could, at any moment, reach out and close this waterway to every tanker and carrier in the region. 18 months of intelligence work had gone into understanding it. Every satellite pass, every signal intercept, every human source who had taken a risk to get information out. All of it distilled into a target package, so complete that the assault teams knew which doors were locked and which ones weren't, which corridors bent left at 15 meters, and which secondary access tunnels had been bricked over in the last renovation. They were not flying into the unknown, or so they believed. The command aircraft orbited at altitude, invisible to every radar in the region, running a complete real-time picture of the electromagnetic environment below. Surveillance feeds from multiple angles. Encrypted relay links to every element in the formation. Battle managers watching green symbols converge on their objectives with the quiet certainty of people who have rehearsed this enough times to stop being afraid of it. The picture was clean. The timeline was ahead of schedule. Every indicator said the same thing. Proceed. 200 meters above the terrain, the lead formation crossed the ridge line and the ropes dropped. Fast rope insertion is exactly what it sounds like. Controlled falls, 3 seconds per man, hitting the ground already moving, weapons indexed, sectors covered before the dust from the previous man's boots had settled. The small scout helicopters peeled away to establish a suppression perimeter. 4 of them, orbiting in a pattern calculated to put their guns on any vehicle that moved on the approach roads within 2 minutes of the first breach. Their job was not to fight. Their job was to make fighting unnecessary for anyone who hadn't already decided to die tonight. The assault teams reached their breach points on time. The fence went down in 3 places simultaneously, cut through hardened mesh in the time it takes to exhale. Guard positions had been handled quietly, with no sound that carried past the immediate area. The teams flowed through the gaps with the kind of unhurried, disciplined movement that only comes from doing something so many times it stops requiring conscious thought. Spacing maintained. Visual contact maintained. The whole formation moving like a single organism with hundreds of separate nervous endings and one shared intent. No contact. No alarms. 6 minutes ahead of schedule. The bunker door opened exactly as the intelligence said it would. The lead element pushed through into the corridor beyond. IR lasers painted the darkness in frequencies only their optics could see. The junction at 15 meters was exactly where it was supposed to be. The secondary door at 30 meters was closed but unlocked, exactly as the source reporting had indicated. 2 seconds of silence. Then every light in the facility came on at once. Not emergency lighting. Not the pale flicker of a backup generator cycling up. Industrial red, flooding every corridor from concealed fixtures that had been installed for exactly this moment, specifically to rob the assault teams of their night vision advantage at the single instant when disorientation was most lethal. The operator's optics whited out completely. For 1.5 seconds, some of the most capable soldiers in the world were functionally blind in an enclosed space they could no longer see. The machine guns opened up before anyone's vision had recovered. The ambush had been designed by someone who understood how Delta operators move, how they stack on doors, how their formations compress at corridor junctions, where they would be most densely packed and least able to reverse direction. The machine gun positions had been placed at exactly those points, in hardened alcoves behind ballistic barriers, with overlapping fields of fire that left no dead ground anywhere in the main corridor. Pre-positioned ammunition, backup gunners, and communications running through a hardwired intercom system, copper wire buried in concrete walls, completely immune to every jamming system on every aircraft circling overhead. The command aircraft's electronic warfare suite had been painting a perfect picture of the facility's radio emissions for 18 months. It had never once detected a wire. The first 60 seconds of the ambush were the worst minute in American special operations since Mogadishu. But Delta Force did not collapse. This is the distinction that separates these operators from nearly every other military organization on Earth. Not just the equipment, not just the training, but the specific psychological structure that selection and years of combat builds in the people who make it through. The reaction was immediate, and it was correct. Fragmentation grenades went into the alcoves within 4 seconds of the first burst. Smoke followed, filling the corridor with obscurant that degraded the machine gunner's visibility just as the operator's optics began to recover from the whiteout. Fire teams collapsed against the walls, moving in bounding pairs, each man covering the other's advance with controlled, aimed fire. They were hurt. They were not broken. Above the facility, the picture was deteriorating. The electronic warfare systems that had been running cold during the approach, sitting silent specifically to avoid giving away their presence, waiting for exactly this moment, came alive across the spectrum simultaneously. The encrypted radio network that was supposed to give every operator a shared real-time picture of the battle space began taking interference. Data packets corrupted. Teams that should have been talking to each other were hearing noise. And then the missile came from a position that hadn't appeared in any of the target packages. A vehicle-mounted anti-aircraft system had driven into position 2 hours before the assault, parked behind a rock outcropping on the southern ridge line. Cold and completely undetectable. Waiting. The launch signature hit the radar warning receiver at the exact same moment the co-pilot saw the ignition flare with his naked eyes on the dark horizon. The pilot broke right and down, pushing into a terrain masking maneuver that was technically perfect and geometrically impossible given the distance to the ridge on his right side. He had approximately 2 seconds to create separation that 2 seconds could not provide. The missile struck the rear rotor assembly. The helicopter came apart in what the aviation community later described with clinical precision as a controlled catastrophe, controlled in the sense that the pilot's last inputs kept the nose from pitching fully inverted before impact, which meant it hit the eastern slope at an angle that was survivable rather than one that wasn't. The fireball was visible for 15 kilometers. Every operator on the ground saw it. Every pilot in every orbiting aircraft saw it. For 3 seconds, the tactical net went completely silent. Then the commander's voice came through, flat and steady. Push. All elements push now. The decision to abandon the original plan and drive straight through the middle of the worst of the fighting was made in the time it takes to draw a breath. There was no realistic alternative. The perimeter around the facility was closing. Quick reaction forces that had been pre-positioned at staging areas within 4 minutes of the target were moving. Trucks and armored vehicles materializing from the desert dark, running without lights, moving fast. The quiet extraction option was dead. The option of falling back to the fence breach points was dead. The only door still open was forward, through the remaining defenders, down to the command center on the 3rd underground level, before the IRGC had time to wipe the systems that 17 countries had spent 18 months trying to find. The little birds outside were working. Their guns tore up the approach roads as the reinforcement column tried to close in. 2 pilots later reported pulling maneuver loads that exceeded the aircraft's rated structural limits. The attack variant went after the vehicle column on the northern road with unguided rockets, turning the lead trucks into burning obstacles that stacked the column behind them and bought the ground teams critical minutes. Inside the facility, what happened will be studied in closed classrooms for a long time. Fire teams breached door after door in total darkness broken only by muzzle flash and the green wash of night optics. The defenders fell back through their own building with discipline, using pre-planned withdrawal routes, trading space for time, trying to slow the assault long enough for their reinforcements to seal the exits. Every door cost something. Every corridor cost more. Operators went down and were handed off to collection points and left with security elements because the assault couldn't pause, couldn't afford any impulse that wasn't directly connected to reaching the 3rd level before the intelligence value of that command center was reduced to rubble by the people who had built it. The breach charge on the command center's final blast door shook the entire lower level of the facility. The assault team went through the opening before the debris had finished falling. What happened in the room in the next 90 seconds does not appear in official after-action reports. The demolitions teams had 4 minutes. They used 3.5. Charges went onto the structural columns, the server infrastructure, the power distribution nodes, the communications hardware, and the hardened data storage systems that the intelligence community had very much wanted to exploit and was not going to get. The building was coming down. Everything in it was coming down. 30 seconds. All elements move. The withdrawal was a running gunfight from the command center to the surface. 4 flights of stairs, 2 breach doors, 3 corridor junctions held by defenders who had finally gotten their quick reaction forces inside through the rear access tunnels and were pushing hard to cut off the exits. The teams ran toward the sound of the firing rather than away from it because the way out was through the contact, and there was no other calculation to make. The remaining helicopters came back in under conditions that the aviation community will argue about for a long time. The anti-aircraft envelope over the facility was active, radar-guided, infrared-guided, optically tracked systems all working simultaneously, all fed by an integrated fire control network that had been built for this exact scenario. The pilots flew through it. They flew through it because the men on the ground needed them to, and because there was no version of this profession that allowed for stopping short of that. Multiple aircraft took hits. Hydraulic systems, rotor components. One helicopter lost tail rotor authority on final approach and hit the landing zone so hard it bounced, but it stayed upright, and the crew stayed conscious, and the operators who reached the extraction point in the next 40 seconds piled in anyway, wounded and unwounded together. Weapons out every door, firing in every direction as the pilot dragged the damaged aircraft back into the air through sheer mechanical stubbornness and the refusal to accept that the situation was as bad as it was. The last man cleared the pickup zone. The last helicopter cleared the ridge line. The quick reaction force was 50 meters behind the final element when the ropes went up. The explosion came up through the earth before it became sound, a pressure wave that traveled through the bedrock and registered in the chest before the ears could process it. Then the facility's roof vented upward in a column of fire and concrete that rose 200 meters before the night air caught it and spread it across the ridge in a slow rain of burning material. Secondary detonations followed. Fuel, ordnance, pressurized systems, each one feeding the next in a rolling series of detonations that lit up the eastern approach to the strait for nearly 40 seconds. The command center was rubble. The communications nodes were rubble. The targeting infrastructure that had been coordinating the missile batteries along the entire northern shore, gone. The formation crossed back into friendly airspace 53 minutes after the first rope dropped. 12 helicopters went in. 11 came back. The crew of the downed aircraft, some of them, had been confirmed alive by a crash site recovery element that was already moving toward a burning hillside in the dark. A separate mission. A separate set of men, already committed to another trip back in. Nobody talked on the flight home. There was nothing to say that the night hadn't already said more clearly. The strait, by first light, looked exactly as it always did. Wide and gray and indifferent, commercial tankers already beginning to move through the choke point as if nothing had occurred 6 hours earlier on the northern shore. The crews of those ships would not know what it had cost to keep that corridor open for another day, another week, another iteration of the quiet, grinding, largely invisible work that never reaches the front page because the people doing it understand, with a clarity that comes from doing it, that visibility is the enemy of effectiveness, and that the most important victories are the ones that look, from the outside, like nothing happened at all. The math was clean and brutal. The objective was destroyed. The mission succeeded. 1 helicopter down, crew unaccounted for, operators who would not be going home. And the question that haunted every debrief, and every closed-door review, and every commander who stared at the timeline afterward wasn't whether it was a victory. The question was whether the best-trained, best-equipped Special Operations Force in the history of warfare had just demonstrated something extraordinary about what human beings can do under impossible conditions, or whether they had simply been capable enough to survive a trap that had been designed by someone who understood them almost as well as they understood themselves. The Strait doesn't answer that question. It just waits for the next night and the one after that and every night after that until someone decides that the cost of contesting it is finally too high. That day has not yet come. the helicopters will fly again.